Hello, everyone. My name is Shid Patel. I'm a program manager on the Microsoft Endpoint Manager team, helping organizations secure their mobile devices and applications using Microsoft 365.
Hello, my name is Ross Smith, and I'm a program manager within the Intune Customer Experience Engineering team. And today, Shiv and I are going to present how to deploy and protect Microsoft 365 mobile apps within your environment. By the end of this session, we hope you'll understand the differences between device and app management models and how to protect data on the mobile device using Intune app protection policies. And finally, how to leverage Azure Active Directory conditional access to ensure app protection policies are successfully delivered to protect the data on your mobile devices. As users, we utilize mobile devices in our day-to-day lives for both personal and work experiences. And it's important to recognize that even though these devices have the term mobile attached to them, they are in fact not devices that we only use on the go. We utilize these in tandem with our desktop style devices. And as users, we have several expectations. We've come to expect the ability to access our data, whether it be work or personal data, at any time from any location using any device with the apps we know and love. From an IT perspective, that does introduce a certain level of risk on how we should protect and enable these type of scenarios. Because as we know, attackers don't just stop and look at a specific class of devices. They're targeting our user population with social engineering attacks, with phishing attacks, to compromise our users and gain access to our data. And so that leads us to the question of why should you utilize the Microsoft mobile apps? Well, it begins with a journey that has resulted into what is collectively now known as Microsoft 365, the combination of Office 365, endpoint management, and enhanced security and data protection mechanisms, resulting in an end-to-end solution that is loved by users, loved by IT, and trusted by all. Now, in this session, Shiv and I aren't going to dive into why users love our Microsoft mobile apps. However, we recommend that if you're not familiar with them, you check them out, because I think what you'll find is that they provide a unique value proposition that enhances the Microsoft 365 experience that you will not find anywhere else. What we will focus on, however, is how these apps are loved by IT and why we consider them to be trusted with IT as well. This aligns with three key pillars. First, we need to ensure that in order to gain access to the data, we need to ensure that that user is trusted. We need to know who that user is, what they've done, and what they're attempting to do. And then finally, we need to be assured that prior to granting access, that the data will reside in an app on a device that is trustworthy. And then finally, while we won't delve into it in this session, you should evaluate what features Microsoft 365 provides in terms of enhanced data classification and data protection mechanisms that can be used to further protect your data. So with that, let's dive into the differences between device and app level management. Now, device management has been around for more than a decade, and it really began as a simple need to provide and control access for mobile messaging. The ability to enforce a PIN and encrypt first came about with Exchange. And since then, mobile device management has evolved to include an encompassing device lifecycle management solution that enables you to configure settings and control what a user can do on the device, push down configuration settings like certificates that can be used for authentication and S-MIME, profiles for how to connect to the on-premises network with VPN, with the goal to manage the life cycle of that device, manage apps on that device, and protect the data that resides on that device. But mobile device management isn't the only solution that's available to you. We also support application management. The key difference between application management and mobile device management is that with application management, we're concerned around configuring and protecting the data within the app itself and managing at the app layer as opposed to the device layer. we still get many of the same benefits that come in with a device management solution. We can configure and update apps. We can report on the usage and inventory of those apps, and we can manage the data within those apps. Now, you may be wondering, is this a competitive type of approach? Is it device management or app management, or can you leverage both? And the answer is you can leverage both. Now, we definitely feel that in certain circumstances, it makes sense to enroll devices, and that's mostly for corporate-owned assets. Whereas for like personally owned devices, we think a mobile application management strategy makes sense. In terms of endpoint manager, Intune provides us the capability to do device management through device enrollment or application management through Intune's app protection policies. And again, app protection policies can be deployed regardless of the device enrollment state. So while you may have an environment that requires all devices to be enrolled, that doesn't mean you can't deploy app protection policies. We recommend that app protection policies should be utilized because, as Shiv will discuss later on, that will provide a further layer of protection for your data.
Thanks, Ross, for the introduction there. Ross went through the differences between MDM and application protection policies, and today I'll start by explaining the application lifecycle and partnerships we have put into place in this space. Our goal is really to ensure that end users are able to gain access to corporate resources while ensuring that admins have the ability to deploy data protection best practices. The application protection policy lifecycle consists of adding apps, deploying them to end users and the stores that they use, configuring them to access data, protecting both apps and devices to ensure that data stays secure, and then retirement of devices and applications. For MDM with enrollment, for iOS, we have put into place a partnership with Apple on supporting the volume purchasing program, which enables apps to be purchased and licenses to be configured for end users and admins. Apps do need to be pinned to the management profile in order to gain access to this data. On Android, we have a partnership with Google on Manage Google Play, where we have the ability to use the Google Play Store for installing, updating, protecting, and configuring applications accordingly. In the application protection policy workload, specifically BYOD, end users are actually free to install from the production app store as an opt-in model, meaning that if they want to get access to Outlook and not Teams, they have the ability to do so. There is no need to enroll it via MDM, which actually reduces the organizational friction. Admins can still make sure that they apply protection and configuration policies to these applications to ensure that corporate data stays secure. For our support on application protection policies, we have more than 60 protected applications, and that number is growing every day. To start, we have 30 applications within the Microsoft 365 productivity suite, as well as over 30 partner applications that have implemented the Intune SDK and growing. Some partner apps choose to fork the application, and some offer to build a new application just for Intune customers. In this line of businesses, the business applications can also integrate the Intune SDK. In addition to Microsoft applications and partner applications, we have partnerships put into place with other UEM vendors to ensure that they're able to leverage the wide ecosystem of Microsoft and Intune app protection policies to ensure that data can be transferred from the protected applications to third-party MDM containerized solutions. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into application protection policies. We do have some fundamentals here that we'd love to discuss with you. For one, multi-identity awareness. We're able to put into play our ecosystem, which essentially targets corporate accounts while leaving personal and unmanaged accounts untouched. In addition to that, all the applications that we deploy have conditional launch, data protection, and access requirement settings. For conditional launch, we're actually able to dive into the device health of the actual device and make sure that if an end user is on a vulnerable app version or an OS version, we're able to prevent access to corporate data. In addition to this, we can actually fine-tune what device model or manufacturer you want to gain access to corporate resources. For access requirements, we have the ability to deploy PIN policies and biometric policies to ensure that the end user gaining access to the corporate data is the end user that is allowed to get access to that data. We ensure that inactivity timers are put into place and that credentials are verified on a timely basis. For data protection, as we'll be showing you in the demo, we actually have the ability to configure how applications play with each other, essentially ensuring that applications are encrypted and where data should be flowing from transferring web data as well as phone telecommunication data to other applications of choice. We also have the ability to selectively wipe applications upon certain heuristics, meaning that the application will be wiped, but nothing on the device will be touched. Now, let's dive in through the demo. To show you the true power of Microsoft Endpoint Manager, we'll go through an admin side demo. If you select Apps, Application Protection Policies, and create a policy for an iOS application, you get the ability to designate a name and a description. Next, you select an application. In this case, we'll choose Outlook. Now you get into the data protection requirements for this application. We can do things like restrict, cut, copy, and paste to other applications. We can also designate access requirements to access apps in a work context. In addition to that, we can even set up conditional launch settings. Things like, do I want to make sure that jailbroken devices are blocked access to corporate resources? And then I can go ahead and assign it to a user or device group. Now let's switch over to the end user side. You notice that I'm prompted with the Touch ID, which was required by my access requirement policy. Next, we'll show you what the data protection settings that I applied actually do on the end user's device. You can notice that I'm trying to copy text from my work email and try to paste it in a non-protected application, such as iOS Notes. When I try to paste it, you notice that I get a prompt saying that my organization's data cannot be pasted here. This is the true power of Microsoft Endpoint Manager and application protection policies.
Thanks, Shiv, for that app protection policy demo. As you saw in Shiv's demo, there are a number of settings available within an app protection policy, and you may be wondering which settings should you choose to help protect your data. Well, that's why we created the app protection policy data protection framework. This framework is broken down into 3 distinct configuration levels. The first being the basic data protection. Basic data protection is our entry-level configuration into utilizing app protection policies. This configuration level enables the capability to protect with a PIN and encrypt your work or school account data within the apps. This is analogous to an Exchange Online mobile device mailbox policy, which provides those same capabilities for messaging data. The key difference being that with an app protection policy, you can apply these settings across all of the Microsoft apps versus just your messaging data. This configuration level also introduces a number of the conditional launch behaviors that we've discussed, including Android device attestation and ensuring Google Play Protect is enabled. Our enhanced data protection configuration level includes everything within level 1 and applies all of the data protection mechanisms and data transfer protection mechanisms that Shiv discussed, including the ability to prevent copy and paste of data from a managed app into an unmanaged app. This configuration level also introduces minimum operating system requirements to ensure your users are using a supported operating system on their mobile devices. And then we have the high data protection configuration level. This configuration level is designed for those users who access highly sensitive data, are high risk, or potentially regulated. It includes everything in level 2 and applies advanced data protection mechanisms like a protected dialer, enhanced PIN configuration, and introduces mobile threat defense as a way to evaluate the health of the device and ensure that the device is healthy prior to granting access to the work or school account data. With the App Protection Policy Data Protection Framework, we offer 2 separate ways in which you can take advantage of it. We offer the ability through JSON templates and PowerShell scripts, the ability to import all 3 configuration levels into your environment and then assign users to those policies. And we offer a guided deployment scenario. This can be accessed within our troubleshooting and support pane within the Endpoint Manager portal. This is a wizard-based user interface that enables you to select the apps, choose between basic data protection or enhanced data protection, and then assign those protection settings to a set of users. It's also important to realize that while this data protection framework highlights what we believe are the recommended app protection policy settings you should deploy. It by no means forces you to deploy those specific settings. You can customize these settings as you see fit to work within your environment. At this point, we've discussed what an app protection policy is and what the settings are that can be used to protect your data. But we haven't discussed how app protection policies are delivered. At a high level, essentially, app protection policies are delivered through the Intune SDK. The Intune SDK will connect into the Intune service and register the user and app to obtain an app protection policy token. The app protection policy service will deliver the policy settings back to the Intune SDK, and the Intune SDK will acknowledge receipt. Now, while that's the flow at a high level, there are distinct differences in the underlying platforms in terms of the execution of that flow. With iOS, the apps are sandboxed from one another, meaning that they cannot execute code from other apps. So as an example, the Outlook app cannot execute code that's contained within the Authenticator app because iOS does not allow what we refer to as cross-process execution. The apps have to run all of these actions independently of one another, or they have to transfer that action to another app. What this means is that we have to embed the Intune SDK into each and every app on iOS. The Android platform is different than iOS. Android allows for cross-process execution, meaning that an app can execute code that exists within another app and utilize that. So we decided to build a different architecture for how we deliver app protection policy settings on the Android platform. In this model on Android, we've implemented the Intune SDK within the company portal app, as opposed to implementing the SDK completely in every single app. This enables us to have an architecture where the company portal can make these connections to the Intune service and obtain policy information, and then apply that policy information to the apps. This architecture allows for us to improve and ensure that we can make changes within the company portal app without requiring app investment. Now, there are times where there is app investment necessary for like when we introduce a new app protection policy setting, like blocking or managing notification data. But there are other scenarios where changes within the SDK can occur without requiring app investment, like changing or increasing our encryption key strength from 128-bit to 256-bit. This was a change that we could implement within the Intune SDK and ship a new company portal app, and correspondingly, all apps on the Android platform that support Intune were able to take advantage and utilize that new encryption key. Whereas on the iOS platform, each and every app would have to consume a new version of the Intune SDK to begin utilizing 256-bit encryption. The last thing I'll mention is that with conditional access, there are differences between both platforms as well. In order to do what we refer to as device registration, on iOS, you need the Authenticator app, whereas on Android, the company portal handles both conditional access and app protection policy delivery. Now that we've discussed what an app protection policy is, what policy settings it provides to protect data, and how the policy is ultimately delivered to the apps, Shiv will discuss how we can do app configuration.
Thanks, Ross, for that deep dive. Today, we can get into how to do advanced app configuration using the Microsoft Endpoint Manager stack. App configuration policies are different from protection policies. Configuration policies allowed for custom and advanced customization of the app experience for end users. Apps are allowed to provide different supported scenarios, and app configuration can be delivered via two methods. For a managed device, we can use the MDM OS channel for enrolled devices, where we can use managed device ACP. For non-managed devices, or BYOD, Intune app protection policy channel can be used to deploy app configuration for these applications. Back to enrolled devices, we have a neat configuration in our UX to provide for the ability to enable just a single allowed work or school account to sign in. This essentially enables only one user to sign in on the device and no others. We also get the ability to manage the default behavior for application settings, as well as we can support this with any enrollment provider, not just Microsoft Endpoint Manager. For devices using application protection policies, we actually also get the ability to do some pretty granular things. For example, we get the ability to manage the default behavior for certain application settings, as well as deploy advanced Intune data protection scenarios using application protection policies. Our preferred management model works both for managed and unmanaged devices. The app customization really depends on the application support. So we gave you a quick start guide for deploying customization for Edge, Office, Outlook, and Teams. We really hope this helps you in Microsoft 365 journey. Next, we can go into how to support line of business applications. Supporting line of business applications is crucial to every organization. Microsoft Endpoint Manager gives us the ability to deploy, assign, protect, as well as update your LOB applications. With or without MDM enrollment, Microsoft Endpoint Manager enables admins to protect applications using either the app wrapping tool, the SDK, or Xamarin bindings in order to apply data protection, access, as well as conditional launch settings to your applications so that your end users' flows are protected. In order to support line of business applications, I mentioned there were 3 methods of doing so. I'll start with the easiest way, the app wrapping tool. It's the simplest way to protect your line of business applications with literally no code changes required. You just upload and protect. This essentially builds a container around your LOB application to which admins can apply protection policies. This is what you want to do if you want to get started quickly and easily while understanding the full impact of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. The SDK provides granular protection capability to developers and admins to ensure that specific end user flows are protected. This also enables the application to be published to the public app stores for consumption by users. Lastly, the Xamarin bindings are cross-platform bindings that allow developers to build in protection features directly in their Xamarin-based app to provide protections for both iOS as well as Android. We also partner with organizations such as Blue Cedar and AppDome to implement the SDK on your behalf if you don't have the engineering bandwidth to implement it yourself. Now, troubleshooting. End users and admins are actually able to collaborate on flows to ensure that work or school data is protected. This happens with our troubleshooting workflow. We essentially get to use the Microsoft Edge browser for iOS and Android to access managed app logs. What happens here is that if an end user runs into a particular issue or a flow, they're able to provide app logs to their admin to which they can investigate of what policies are actually reaching the device versus what the admin expected on the device. In order to use this, you open the Edge browser on either your iOS or Android device, and you actually get to type in a specific URL that gives you access to all the flows that your admin would need in order to troubleshoot this. For a list of settings stored in the app logs, we have documentation for you to review. And then if you want to email these logs over to your IT admin, we're actually able to do so as well. This is a true collaboration between end users and admins to make sure that they're able to use Microsoft 365 resources to really impact the end user. Now, pass it off to Ross, who'll go through conditional access and identity.
Now that we understand what app protection policies are, we need to think about how we can ensure app protection policies are successfully delivered to the app prior to granting access to the data on the mobile device. And that's through conditional access. If you're not familiar with Azure Active Directory Conditional Access, it's nothing more than a policy-driven approach that takes a set of assignments and conditions and makes a decision on whether to block access or allow access. From an assignment perspective, we're targeting a set of identities, who's attempting to authenticate, and the cloud apps or resources or endpoints that they're attempting to authenticate against. And then we can look at a series of conditions. What location are they attempting to authenticate? What device platform are they utilizing? Which client app are they authenticating with? We can even look at advanced scenarios to determine the trustworthiness of the user through risk. We can look at user risk, and this is where the intelligent security graph comes into play to make an intelligent decision on the state of that user while they're authenticating. From a user risk perspective, we look to see whether the user account is compromised. And if so, we can force a password reset. Or we could look at sign-in risk as a whole, which evaluates the current authentication requests as well as past authentication risks to make a decision as to the state or the risk level of that current authentication risk so that we can make an intelligent decision on whether to continue to block access or allow access. If we decide to allow access, we have several grant access controls that can further define how that access is granted. For the purposes of Endpoint Manager, there are 3 distinct access controls. First being require device to be marked as compliant. Require device to be marked as compliant is as it sounds. In this scenario, we're requiring that the device be enrolled with a unified endpoint management solution and that the device meet all compliance policies as defined by that unified endpoint management solution. This can even include the use of mobile threat defense vendors or Microsoft Defender ATP to assign a device risk that further evaluates the health of that device. As long as the device meets both conditions, is enrolled and is compliant, access can be granted. And then we have our other 2 controls, require approved client app and require app protection policies. And as their name implies, these have to do with app protection policies. The first, being require approved client app, is a grant access control that has existed for a number of years within Azure Active Directory and is made up of a statically defined list within Azure Active Directory of apps, mainly Microsoft apps, that have integrated the Intune SDK. This grant access control does not do any evaluation of whether the Intune SDK is enforced or if the user is even licensed for Intune. And then finally, we have the require app protection policy grant access control. This grant access control is ultimately designed to replace require approved client app. It addresses the deficiencies that exist in require approved client app. It works with first-party apps, third-party apps, and even line of business apps that have done the necessary investment, that have integrated an authentication library, integrated the Intune SDK, and made targeted code changes within the apps to support the require app protection policy grant access control. And it moves away from a statically defined list within Azure Active Directory because it ultimately is defined by what apps you have selected within your app protection policies. And it does what I refer to as policy assurance. Policy assurance is nothing more than ensuring there has been a successful delivery and application of the app protection policy before an access token is granted. So let's look at the policies you need in order to ensure you only allow the Microsoft apps to connect and access data on your mobile devices. And it's going to break down into 4 distinct policies. The first being, how do we ensure only mobile Office apps can connect to your tenant and access your data? So we'll start with our assignments. We're going to target our user population, like in this case, Jane. From a cloud app perspective, we're going to target Office 365. And we should be broad here. We shouldn't scope to individual cloud endpoints like Office 365 Exchange Online for 2 distinct reasons. First, there are interdependencies between all of the services within Microsoft 365. If we look at Teams as an example, Teams stores data both in Exchange Online and SharePoint Online. You cannot create a conditional access policy that connects to the Teams service while blocking SharePoint Online or Exchange Online. Users will simply be unable to utilize the Teams app in that case because they will be unable to obtain an access token. Likewise, within our client apps themselves, we're building productivity scenarios that enable users to be able to access the services they need while staying within a single app. For example, with Outlook for iOS and Android, we have the ability to create tasks through To-Do. We have the ability to join and create Teams meetings. We have the ability to access OneDrive for Business through the file picker and the ability to access the Office feed. It's just 4 core examples of how we're building solutions that enable users to utilize the full potential of Microsoft 365. And that is why you should not target individual cloud apps and focus on the broader ecosystem within the environment. From a condition standpoint, we're going to target device platforms as iOS and Android, and we're going to be targeting modern authentication capable client apps. This will be an allow policy, so we're going to leverage these grant access controls. require approved client app with require app protection policy. And this will be defined with an or operator within the grant access controls. And the reason being is because we're in a transitory state. We are in the midst of migrating apps from the require approved client app grant access control support to require app protection policy. Azure Active Directory behind the scenes has the knowledge of which apps support the require app protection policy grant access control versus those that support only the require approved client app, and thereby ensures that an app will be held to the correct grant access control as a result. So for example, if Jane is attempting to access her email and utilizes Outlook for iOS and Android, Outlook for iOS and Android supports the require app protection policy grant access control. So what that means is policy must be delivered to the app before an OAuth token can be generated. Assuming that happens, Jane will then be able to access her data within Outlook Mobile. However, if Jane were to attempt to use a modern authentication capable mail client on her mobile device like iOS Mail, Jane will be blocked because that mobile client does not support app protection policies. And therefore, Jane is blocked. And Azure Active Directory indicates to Jane she's blocked because she's not using an approved app. Next, we want to talk about the browser. Now, in reality, this policy and its predecessor could be combined into a single policy. But for the purposes of this discussion, I wanted to highlight why you'd want to protect the web browser. And that's because Microsoft 365 offers you the capability to access data through web browsing sessions like Outlook on the web, SharePoint Online, or even Office.com. So our assignments are going to be the same in this policy. Likewise, from a condition standpoint, we're still going to target iOS and Android, but our client app is scoped to browser. And we're still going to rely on the require approved client app and require app protection policy grant access controls with an or operator. The end result being that if Jane attempts to authenticate with a browser that supports app protection policies like Microsoft Edge, that app protection policy must be delivered successfully before an access token is granted. If that occurs, Jane will be able to access the browsing endpoint like Office.com. However, if Jane uses a third-party browser like Safari, Chrome, or any other popular browser, she will be blocked from authenticating against any of your tenants' endpoints. And it will be indicated by Azure Active Directory that she's blocked because she's not using an approved client app. These two policies handle modern authentication, but we also need to think about legacy authentication. And so the first of which we'll handle is by blocking basic authentication ActiveSync. In this policy, we're going to target our users. And from a cloud app perspective, we can be granular in this case because ActiveSync is only supported against Exchange Online. So we could target Office 365 Exchange Online, or we could use the broader Office 365 cloud app endpoint. From a condition standpoint, we're only going to target client apps, specifically Exchange ActiveSync. We don't need to worry about device platform in this case, because in fact, we want to ensure that ActiveSync can't be used on any device platform. And then from an access control perspective, you may think this would be an outright block policy, but in fact, this is going to be an allow policy. And we're going to use the require app protection policy grant access control. Why? Because ActiveSync is a unique protocol in that it has quarantine logic built into it. So if a device does not meet the requirements as dictated by Azure Active Directory or Exchange Online can quarantine the device and notify the user via a quarantine message that the device or client has been quarantined. And we, in this policy, are going to take advantage of that quarantine capability. So by utilizing the require app protection policy grant access control, we are effectively going to block access utilizing basic authentication ActiveSync clients. What happens is when Jane attempts to set up her mail profile, the mail profile setup will appear successful. But when Jane launches the mail app, she'll receive a quarantine message that indicates she needs to use Outlook. And the reason why is because of the require app protection policy grant access control. Because this ActiveSync client is not defined in the app protection policy or has not integrated the Intune SDK, which the vast majority of ActiveSync clients available haven't, this ActiveSync client gets blocked. If we were to use a block policy or any of the other grant access controls, a different quarantine message would have been delivered, thereby preventing this user education piece of telling Jane to install Outlook. Finally, we need to think about all the other protocols that support basic authentication that can be used to access Office 365 endpoints, like Exchange Online, POP, IMAP, Exchange Web Services, SMTP, PowerShell, etc. All of these support legacy authentication, and we need to address that. Now, unfortunately, none of these other protocols have quarantine logic built into them, so we can't use an allow policy in the manner that we did with ActiveSync. This means we have to use a block policy. And because these protocols don't have any level of knowledge around quarantine logic, the response returned is going to be an access denied. And it's up to each individual client and/or protocol in terms of how they interpret an access denied response. Now, this policy is broad in nature. It only targets the other client's client app. And so that carries some risk in your environment. And you need to do the due diligence to determine what clients, what protocols are currently utilizing basic authentication within your environment. You can do that through Azure Active Directory sign-in reports. So evaluate the environment first before implementing a broad policy of this nature. So in conclusion, hopefully you now understand why we believe the Microsoft apps are the trusted apps that you can use to protect your data. We have Intune app protection policies, which ensure that data cannot be leaked by introducing data protection and transfer mechanisms. We have Azure Active Directory that can be utilized through conditional access to ensure app protection policies are successfully delivered prior to granting access to the data. And then we also have the capability to customize the apps as you see fit through app configuration policies. Thank you for attending this session. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Shiv or myself. We're there to help, whether that be understanding how to utilize app protection policies, conditional access, or even how to integrate the Intune SDK. Thanks for your time.